Dom Thurbon is a thinker and a doer. He's an entrepreneur, researcher, writer, and speaker who's spent nearly 20 years helping leaders and organizations change behavior in the face of disruption. He's built and sold two global businesses, including Carricons Group, worked as a partner at EY, and is co-founder of Alchemy Labs. He's the author of several publications, including his latest book, To Be Honest, which explores why truth is so hard to tell inside organizations, why honest cultures outperform, and what leaders must do to create environments where truth can actually happen. Dom, welcome to the Evolution Partners podcast.
Thank you so much, Brad. It is truly delightful to be here.
Why do we create environments where truth can't be spoken?
Well, I don't think we do it deliberately. In fact, almost never have I seen it happen by primary intent. And by that, I mean, when you look around at organizations, everyone will tell you that truth matters and that honesty matters. In fact, they will tell you it is the most important thing in the world. They will put it in their company values and stick them on the wall. Nearly, I think it's 70% or more of corporate values have honesty or integrity in them. When you poll people and say, does honesty matter? One of the most durable findings in social science across geographies, across cultures, across religions, across sectors is that people tell you truth is the most important thing in the world. And yet when you look at revealed behavior rather than stated preference, as you say, we make truth-telling incredibly difficult and we fail to do it all the time. In fact, evidence would suggest that most people lie every day, and about 60% of us lie something like once or more than once every 10 minutes. And so the question you ask, which is, why do we do that?
Yeah.
I think is the middle of the bullseye of a question, of the question. I think, and it's the beating heart of the book. And I think the truth is there's a lot of reasons why it happens. But I think the first and foremost that sits above all the other ones is the truth is hard. It's really hard. And it's hard for many reasons and in different contexts. It's hard for different reasons. But I think the truth is that the truth is hard.
Yeah. I think about the context in which you've just described, and I think most people in most organizations, and dare I even check myself before I say it, politician. No, I can't say that. No, I didn't say that. No, most people really
got anyone in mind, Brad?
No, most people start out with good intentions, right? They think, yeah, I'm going to be honest, but then it's like the system stops them, or the system kind of gets them, coerces them into, little white lies or things that happen.
Yeah, there's a beautiful model that we use in Alchemy Labs to think about human. So my co-founder, Dr. Emily Heath, is a behavioral neuroscientist, and she published a beautiful, very simple articulation of the drivers of human behavior. And it's this very simple idea that every behavior that you and I engage in every moment, right? And truth-telling is a behavior. You're either doing it or you're not. Every behavior that we engage in sits at the intersection of intrinsic factors, our internal state, and the environment. And so, as you say, part of the reason why we lie is there are system-level factors that drive it. If you create a really strong disincentive, so for instance, let's not talk about any politicians specifically, but let's say hypothetically you were to receive a report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and you didn't like the job numbers and your response was to fire the Secretary of Labor, right, which is something that happened recently. You have created a very strong system level disincentive to anyone ever telling the truth because you've created fear. But there are also internal factors, right? The way we feel in any given moment. If someone puts work in front of you and says, "Hey, Brad, what do you think of this? Is this a good job?" and you're their manager, this happens every day. People put work in front of us as leaders and say, "What do you think about this?" If the true answer to that question is that is absolutely dreadful work, there is an intrinsic barrier to making truth happen in that moment, because you don't want to feel like a knob. You don't want to feel
Yeah.
like you're being a bad person. You don't want to upset someone. So it's this combination of system level factors and intrinsic, particularly emotional factors that collide, that sort of govern the choice of, in any given moment, in any given second, am I going to tell the truth or not?
So to pull on that thread, do you think that the real reason that people aren't telling the truth is that they care more about being accepted than being honest? Do you think that it is something around that acceptance?
That's often the case. There's literally one of the things I discuss in the book is called the social theory of lying, right? And it is this idea of if you were going to break it down, I'd say there's kind of 4 or 5 reasons why we lie, and on that list, I would say we lie to fit in, which is exactly what you're saying. It's kind of social pressure in some ways to lie. One of the most interesting examples of this, by the way, is when you look at conspiracy theories.
Yes.
So when you unpack people's propensity to believe in conspiracy theories, the way I guess you would intuitively think it works is we develop these models of the world and then we find people who share the view, right? So we go, I think the earth is flat. I'm going to join the Flat Earth Society. Actually, it normally works the other way around. We find a group of people and then we adopt their beliefs to fit in. And a lot of conspiracy theories are adopted. They call it adopted defensively, right? So you literally band together as a group of people and develop your theories of the world to protect yourself from outsiders.
And does that happen in organizations? Is there an analogy to that?
All the time, absolutely all
Yeah.
the time. Yeah, definitely. So I think the most useful way to think about this dynamic in organizations for leaders is there are 3 very distinctive types of truth that we encounter as leaders and managers in businesses every day, right? So the first is what I would call them truth, right? So that is when a group of people get together and they talk about everyone out there, right? Them in scare quotes, if you're only listening to the audio. So we might get together in a room of leaders and go, oh man, our staff are, our team's just so disengaged. They're just not up to the task. Or the staff might get together and, man, our leaders are so disconnected. Management really doesn't get it around here. We sit in a room and we talk about them out there. The second type of truth is we truth, right? So we sit in a room and we talk about ourselves as a group. So for instance, when I was at EY, we did one of Australia's largest culture reviews, right? So we got Elizabeth Broderick to come in, review our culture, and David LaRocca, our managing partner and CEO at the time, pre-committed to releasing the entire report unedited in full publicly, right? So that was we as EY talking about we, the business, and like our problems with engagement, our problems with inclusivity, all those sorts of things. We truth. So this might be a group of leaders getting feedback as a leadership team.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And sitting there and going out, what are our staff telling us? What are the truthful conversations we need to have about us? Then there's a third type of truth, and you can probably see where it's going because we've had them truth, we truth, no surprises for guessing. The third type is me truth, right? So this is when I have a truthful conversation about myself. And what we often find to the in-group, out-group thing and to the social theory fitting in, when we're having we truth conversations, when we're talking about we as a business, we will find that we get in a room, groupthink breaks out. We all settle on a very common shared narrative as a business, and it becomes very difficult for any individual to stick their hand up and go, well, hang on a sec. I don't buy that. I don't believe that. I don't think that's true, right? Because of the social pressure to fit in. And so I think that's where we see that playing out inside organizations all the time. It's so lonely to be the one voice that thinks differently to everyone else on the team. And we're hardwired to not want to be that. We really want to fit in our views, in our opinions, in our beliefs, and in our social status.
It's hardwired inside of us, right?
Absolutely. Runs incredibly deep. I mean, you want to know how much social pressure matters for people? even inside a maximum security prison, right? The worst thing you can do for someone is put them in solitary confinement. We would rather be surrounded by murderers, rapists, criminals than be on our own.
Yeah.
Like the pressure to fit in is incredible.
Yeah.
And we all experience it. We are social creatures.
That's a fascinating way to look at it. Yeah. So in business, when something isn't working, I'll start that again. In business, what happens when people know something isn't working, but everyone keeps acting like it's fine?
Well, look, I mean, many issues sit on the other side of that. I think the biggest one I see is people disengage.
Yeah.
So in the and sorry, there's probably one additional step to that. People disengage, and small problems become really big problems. So, for instance, there was a train derailment in Tasmania a few years ago. I share this case study in the book. This is truly an incredible story. It's basically like Unstoppable, the Hollywood movie with Denzel Washington. A cement freight train. There's a failure in equipment, and it takes off from the cement, like the cement yard in Railton in northern Tasmania. This freight train full of cement, thousands and thousands of tons of cement, takes off without anyone behind the wheel. It goes tearing across northern Tasmania. It goes through something like 14 level crossings at peak hour with no one behind the wheel before the police can get there to shut them down. It's traveling at 70, 80, 90 kilometers an hour on track rated for 50 or 60. It winds up derailing itself in Devonport, flies through a park, debris goes everywhere. There's like police cars traveling along beside it with their sirens away. It is something out of a Hollywood movie. It is a miracle no one was killed. Miracle no one was killed. And when they looked back at, obviously, the Australian Transport Safety Bureau does the investigation of this thing. It was a huge kind of story in Devonport and in Tasmania. And when they do the investigation, they find there's no human fault. Right? The people did the right thing. And on the day, it's important to say for legal reasons, that's absolutely true. The driver that was meant to be on the train did nothing wrong. The people in the rail yard did nothing wrong. It was an equipment failure. But when you look back at that equipment failure, buried on like the 250th page of the report, what they find is that in the 6 months prior to the train derailment, there were more than 200 errors logged with this particular piece of equipment. 200 errors logged with this piece of equipment. And no one listened. No one listened. There was, to invoke your question, there was a problem that people were just ignoring. And of course, if you ignore a problem for long enough, eventually people stopped reporting. They stopped sending the errors up the line. And then 6 months later, we have a full near-death experience that by only some form of divine intervention did this train not like run into a town. 200 times people tried to speak up and tell the truth about the equipment, but people weren't listening. People didn't want the conversation. And so eventually they stopped speaking up, and the problem doesn't go away. It just sits in the background, getting bigger and bigger. And I feel like we encounter this in business all the time. We literally, there's a phrase we use of every interaction teaches people how to behave. As a leader, we're teaching our team how to behave all the time. And in this case, when the team was trying to speak up and tell the truth about the faulty equipment, the leadership didn't listen for long enough that they taught the team to stop speaking up. And so I think that's what happens when problems go unaddressed and things tick along. We teach people around us, this is not an issue. Don't bother speaking up. Nothing's going to happen about it. Don't bother raising the issue. We're not going to solve it. Don't bother bringing me the problem. We're not going to fix it. And eventually we just teach people to be quiet and teach people to get along. And we build these cultures. In that case, you wouldn't say it's a culture of lying, but you'd say it's a culture of failing to make truth happen. If you see the distinction I'm drawing there.
And what does it feel like to be an employee in that environment where the honest. I don't know if it's honesty is suppressed. I can't put the right words on it.
I think that's how I'd put it. I think that's a lovely way of putting it. It's almost like comfortable dishonesty. It's not lying. Like people weren't asked to fill out a form where at the end of every day they said, "Did you encounter any faults today?" And they said no. They just stopped. They didn't lie. They just didn't make the truth happen. And so it's kind of like the truth being suppressed, dishonesty emerging in this kind of comfortable passive state. And I think that when you talk to people about how it feels, and anyone listening to this will be able to describe how it feels because we've all been there, right? We've all been in organizations where in our own way this is happening. I think it feels a few different ways. Number one, it creates such a sense of frustration ongoing because you're encountering these problems every day and just have this sense of we're not getting anywhere, we're not having the real conversation, we're not talking about the most important things. It just drives frustration and disengagement. In the longer term, though, I think it gets worse than that. I think it breeds active resentment. We create teams where people will literally, and I've seen this in, like, people have said this in workshops that I've facilitated about this, where they will say things like, what's the right way of putting it? They'll say things like, man, we just can't have the real conversation around here, and it's doing my head in. Like everyone sits in the room and they all know there's something that should be being discussed and it's just not. And every single person leaves feeling resentful that they wasted the time in the meeting and the proper, honest conversation wasn't had. And it absolutely drives disengagement and resentment.
It's so sad, isn't it? You started that telling a train story. I think one of the challenges if we look to movies, it always gets resolved in the movie. Like I think about Erin Brockovich, like they're working a narrative arc, so it gets resolved. But the problem is in these workplaces, unless we do something, unless something changes, it doesn't. And the culture can sit like that for a very long time.
Yeah, that's an incredibly important point. And you made reference earlier in the conversation, Brad, when you said that like we're sometimes stuck in a system that encourages either lying or maybe just comfortable dishonesty or not truth happening. I think there's a flip way of thinking about that, and it's incredibly important you just raised it, which is I think we need to remember in every organization, we're not stuck in a system, we are the system. We are the system. And it's like, you might know Gus Balbonton's work. He's a brilliant writer and speaker. He's the ex-CTO of Lonely Planet. And I once heard him say, dude, if you're stuck in traffic and complaining about the traffic, you got to remember you are the traffic at that point. And that line, you are the traffic, and it's his line, not mine, really, really stuck with me because I think that what I often wonder about, and I do a lot of work with clients on this is, let's say there's 5 people in a meeting, right? And every single one of them is sat there going, man, this is the honest conversation that's just not being had here. Who's the system in that room, right? Like what is the system going on in that room? The system is those 5 people. They are the system. We are the system. At some point, individuals need to take accountability for understanding that we are not only consumers of culture, we are creators of culture in organizations. And I would love to see a change in engagement surveys, right? We often, when we do engagement surveys, we ask people like, how innovative is the culture? How innovative is blah, blah, blah. I think it would be a great question to ask. Describe the things you have done to make the culture of this organization innovative. Describe the things you have done to make the culture of this organization honest. Describe the things you have done systems matter. Don't get me wrong. Like systems matter massively. And the more senior we are, the larger our impact on creating culture. And you can prove that empirically. But every single person, every single day is creating culture in their moment-to-moment decisions. And one of the reasons I think the Me Truth conversation is important is I would say the most powerful thing we can do to create a culture of honesty is go first. It's to understand that like in any given moment, all of our behavior is teaching the people around us how to behave. and all of our choices are shaping culture, not just consuming it. And so if we really want to create an honest business, it actually starts with individuals making the choice to make truth happen themselves. And so, like I said, I don't want to undersell the role that structure and system have. They're massive. But at work, we're all part of that system.
Yeah.
And we need to take some agency and accountability for how we show up in that regard.
This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven, structured, strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan to build the business that you want and the life that you want. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. And you can also check out our books, Made to Thrive, which is about the 5 roles of a CEO. Becoming a great CEO rather than just a good CEO in your business. Second is Onboarded, which is about hiring and onboarding great people, making sure that you give yourself the greatest chance for people to succeed in your organization. And then third is Bigger Isn't Better, Better is Better, which is about building a business that is better rather than bigger. It's not about building a little business. It's about building a business that compounds, a business that you can actually fall in love with. Again, that word agency, I feel like there's a significant challenge today, especially in this country, Australia, with agency, because I think, be it the tall poppy syndrome or the cultural norms, the way the media interacts with the public, I do feel as though agency is something that is important that we've lost too much of, and taking responsibility for your own actions and your duties as a person, not just your duties in your role, but that agency, I think, is so fundamentally important. And I think, yeah, to circle back to your point, everyone has a part to play.
Yeah, it's such an interesting conversation, right? Because I really share that feeling of that feeling of it feels like we're lacking agency in so many places and in so many contexts. And I think for me, one of the things that's driving it is there are so many forces at play at the moment that loom really, really large in our minds, right? And so, like, there's massive macro level forces that we really can't do anything about, right? Like, so you and I are not going to open the Strait of Hormuz off the back of this call, like that's it. Although DJT, give us a call. We're happy to give it a crack, but we're unlikely to have a material impact on that outcome. And there's a very, very long list of things going on in the world, I think, at the moment where it makes individuals feel disempowered. I don't know why this line pops into my head. I'm not a religious person, but there's a beautiful poem where it's just those 2 lines of "Oh Lord, the sea is so big and my ship is so small," and it's such a beautiful. I love that sentiment. I think the world feels like that sometimes. The sea is so big, the storm is so large, and our ship is so small. And so it's very easy to feel disempowered. You take something like AI, where the market has moved in such a way now where I think everyone is stuck in perpetual anxiety that they're lagging behind on AI. Like, it just, between AI vendors and companies all wanting to claim that they're AI native and AI leaders, there's now just this sense of everyone, I think, is stuck feeling that everyone else has got it figured out, when the truth is no one's got it figured out. And so now we're like stuck feeling behind. There's all these macro forces. And I think it's really natural to retreat into a low agency state in that thing. I think we get shoved there. And I think in those moments, we have to find ways to dig deep and understand that even in the context of those sort of macro forces, we can still take agency and accountability for our own behaviors, agency and accountability for our own choices, and that the way we choose to show up in any environment shapes that environment. John Shah once said, "The future is not a place we're going, it's a place we're creating." And I want to put that on my wall, like that we are not consumers of culture, we are creators of culture. We are not passengers to the future, we're architects of the future. And there is a certain level of agency which at some point we need to dig really deep to find in a world that's making us feel so helpless.
What's the leader's job in creating an honest organization?
Man, I love that question. So for me, leadership is about creating a setting. For me personally, the hardest bit of transitioning into leadership that I ever found was grappling in my mind with moving from being an individual contributor, where it was all about my expertise and my skills and my output, to being in a leadership role where it became everyone else's skills and output. And I think that's a really common barrier, right? Common transition. And so I think the role of the leader is to learn to judge themselves purely on impact rather than intent. And to understand that whilst we judge, in the words of Peter Feuder, whilst we judge ourselves by our intent, we judge everybody else by their impact. And that means as a leader, I might want to judge myself by my intent, but everyone else is judging me by my impact.
Yeah.
And so I think the role of the leader is to become a student and a curator of your impact and to understand how that translates into honesty or not. And I have some more specific ideas for that, but at a high level, that's my kind of view on it.
And so I'm thinking about transparency. I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking about leaders who say, yeah, we're transparent, and then there's challenges or what they perceive to be doing. I think it's a little bit different than what you just suggested. Yeah, we're honest. There's some things we can't tell people, and I guess there is. There we know there's always had to be some things that are private. That's fine, but then how do they know what the line is? How do they know? How do they know where honesty is beginning to drift? Because that was the beginning of our conversation. We start with good intentions and then it drifts. So what's the red flag that you know that you're beginning to drift? Perhaps is where I'm heading.
Yeah. I think there's two red flags. But maybe just to do a quick drive by on the transparency point you just made, because I think that's incredibly important. Businesses don't work when people. It is true, you can't just walk around saying everything. Like, it doesn't. Firstly, you look like a psychopath, and secondly, like, some things are commercial in confidence. I think the trick for navigating that line is just be explicit. You might not be able to share a piece of information. You can absolutely be truthful that you're not in a position to share that information. Yes. And so at one of maybe sounding a little bit naff, but I think this is how it works in my head. Sometimes you just have to be transparent about the lack of transparency. And people are thirsty for that, I think, because in absence of communication, people just write their own stories. Yeah. And so we can be explicit about the lack of transparency and honest about the lack of transparency. And that's not dishonesty. I would say that's not dishonesty. That is truthfully saying, I'm sorry, I'm not in a position to communicate that information.
And that's reasonable.
That's totally reasonable. Totally reasonable. To your point about the red flags, there's two red flags, I think, that honesty is starting to drift. Number one, as a leader, so let's just put ourselves in the seat of a leader for a second. Number one, you stop getting information flowing upwards. I don't think it's the case as a leader that no news is good news. I think it's the case as a leader that no news is no news. And the fact that there's no news is often a problem. Because we know that people are much more likely to share good news up the line than bad news. We know that people, the way that we report stories, events, data, figures, we're likely to always do a little bit of positioning. And so I think as a leader, one of the first things we need to be on the lookout for is actually just the absence of information flow, even before we get to qualitative assessment of the information. I think most of the time people don't sell a lie up the line. They sell silence up the line. And so that's the first kind of piece. And the way to counteract that, by the way, is to so you got to ask yourself, so why does that happen? And I think often it's just out of fear. People don't want to tell leaders bad news. They don't want to tell leaders the truth because they're worried they're going to get in trouble.
Yeah.
And so counteracting that is, there's a lot for leaders, I think, to just pay attention to how they react when they get negative information or bad news.
Yeah.
And that will teach people whether they're safe to sell it up the line. So that's flag number one, I think, which is just the kind of absence of information. And then I think flag number two is you hear about things rather than you hear things. And so often what we'll find is that so imagine, say, a group of leaders in a formal reporting meeting where they're reviewing spreadsheet. It might be like a meeting where you're literally looking at project priorities and you're having a WIP meeting. You're looking at like, how's everyone going on this thing? Sort of meeting you'd find yourself in. We've all found ourselves in 1,000 times. If you start getting cues in those meetings where you got something on the document in front of you, but someone's like, oh yeah, no, I know that's what's said, but actually I was talking to Jack and like I heard something else, or like Judy was actually just telling me in the corridor before this meeting, blah, 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 blah. So you start hearing, it's not the absence of information. It's just everything's coming through back channels. And I think these are the cues that we're starting to be in just a kind of a low truth environment.
In his book, How the Mighty Fall, Jim Collins documented a path that he calls a doom loop, where very successful companies take a predictable step after another to capitulation and I guess failure. The very beginning of that is hubris. Do you think that there's a connection between the absence of information escalating upwards to leadership and the establishment of hubris?
I think it can be a factor. And interestingly, if you think about maybe the opposite of hubris as kind of like vulnerability and humility, I think the presence of those things really helps with truth. And I share an amazing case study in the book actually about a heart surgeon who, heart surgeons not famous for their humility in most walks of life. I was just going to tell a joke about heart surgeons, which I won't do right now. So I interviewed a heart surgeon who was talking about how
everybody wants to know the joke, Dom. Everybody's like, I wonder what that joke is. It must be a good one.
Why is the leading cause of death amongst heart surgeons drowning?
Why?
Because even when they realize they can't walk on water, they still won't close their mouths. And now that was Professor Martin Elliott's joke, not mine, who I interviewed for the book. But he was telling a story about how this revolution in surgical outcomes only came when the senior surgeons finally had the moment of realizing they were the problem. And they worked with Formula One pit crews to like understand how to do information management and information flow better and create settings where people speak up. So definitely the flip side of hubris, like vulnerability, like the presence of those things really, really works. The reason I hesitate on saying, I think the honest answer to the question is, yeah, hubris and its close cousin arrogance, and ego not in the sense of arrogance, but just in the sense of like sense of self and, oh, but if I'm honest, I have to be honest about my own vulnerabilities and my own challenges. Those things definitely matter. They definitely matter. The reason that I hesitated on saying they're a massive thing is that I think I'm much more interested in the presence of humility than the than the presence of hubris. I'm just like, how do you take that step as a leader to go from that sense of ego and self and hubris into vulnerability and humility? Because the leaders that can take that step, in my experience, are the ones that are able to create these kind of amazing cultures around them where truth happens. But it's hard. It's really difficult. It's especially hard in a culture where we always want to, like, we get there's such an alpha male kind of stereotype of leadership, always the smartest person in the room, the brash fast talker, the I've got the answers, bring me your problems and I shall solve them. I was gonna say it's like the vanilla ice school of leadership. If you got a problem, yo, I'll solve it. There's such a caricature of leadership that is like that. But I think people live into that caricature of like, I've always got to be the smartest one in the room. I've always got to have an answer to this question. Just think, someone said it last week at a panel at a Queensland government conference I was at. The chief scientist for Queensland just said if she could wave a wand and do one thing, it would just be teach leaders to say, I don't know, more often. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do in a situation is just say, I don't know. Sometimes that's the most honest thing you can do.
And the best thing.
I
want to pull on that thread to talk about kindness. Because I'm interested, when a leader's trying to be kind, what's the line between protecting someone and avoiding the truth?
Yeah, man, you entire books have been written about that question, and it's a tough one. So I'd say there's two things to guard against here. Actually, maybe three things here that I would deal with in quick succession. So one is, be really careful that you're not dressing up kindness to yourself as kindness to others.
Yes.
Yeah, because sometimes we use the excuse of, well, I can't tell them that. They'd be really upset. What you really mean is you'll feel like you're worried about upsetting them, so I'm not going to say. You're actually being kind to yourself. You're just dressing it up as kindness to other people. So beware of that. Secondly, if you genuinely Brene Brown once said, clear is kind.
Yes.
Clear is kind. And I think about feedback situations at work that I've been in where I'm like, this train wreck of a situation where we're like, I'll come in kind of late on a process and I'll be like, man, if there had have just been a simple feedback conversation 3 months ago that was low stakes, that was in the moment, that called out a behavior, that addressed a piece of work, we would not be sitting here in a performance management or a termination conversation today.
Yeah.
You know what would have been kind? Having an uncomfortable conversation 3 months ago. That would have been kind. And so I think we need to remember that making someone feel uncomfortable or feel sad or be confronted with difficult feedback, that is not unkind. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is like find a way to create a space where it's okay for everyone to be uncomfortable and have a difficult conversation. That there are plenty of situations where that is the kindest thing to do, and feedback is almost always one of those at work. But the third and final thing is, if you genuinely can't find a way to have a conversation or have a piece of feedback that you think won't be really, really bad for the other person or really, really bad for you, I do think it's okay to simply not have that conversation then. Like, there are... The issue with it is we need to be careful we don't use that as an excuse. But the thing about that is, that's based on your capability then, what you're saying, right? We're saying, well, I don't know how to have this conversation in a way that's not going to upset the person. My response to that is always, cool, learn, figure it out.
That's why leaders get paid more.
Yeah.
Because they've got to bring in a whole new set of skills, and they've got to do those things which are difficult, but that's the job.
Yeah. And you have to learn. You literally have to practice. And it might be like any other capability. You might do it and realize you're not as good at it as you thought and have to develop the skills. It's about finding what words to say. It's about finding the right setting, picking the right moments to do these things. It is making truth happen is a capability. Like, this is, I think, where we get a little bit caught up. We think of honesty and integrity as values. Right, we put them on the wall and we say, oh, this organization values honesty. I'm like, honesty is not a value, it's a skill. You need to be able to learn the right. It's like people think if we just take the lying away, we're left with honesty. We're not. We could be left with all sorts of stuff. We could be left with silence. We could be left with avoidance. We could be left with a bit of the truth, but not all the truth. Making truth happen is about building a capability set to find the right words, manage discomfort and anxiety, manage people's emotions, create settings, create moments. It's a capability like any other one. And I wish more organizations would stop claiming it as a value rather than learning it as a skill, because that's the real difference, I think.
About risk, because in today's workplace, and I think it seems as though in the last 10 to 15 years, even more so, new challenges around HR, legal, bullying, unfair dismissal, a whole range of risks have become perhaps more prominent is the right way to address it, or the risk seems more out there. How does that change people's willingness to be honest with each other, do you think? And I guess then the follow-up is, what do we do about it?
Yeah, that's an interesting frame. I hadn't really thought about it like that before, but that's a truly curious frame, because I do think the data, I think, would suggest there is a somewhat chilling effect that we're seeing from a lot of. I want to be careful with the way I language this, because I'm about to say something that makes me sound like I hold views I don't solve. But if hold views I don't hold, but if you look, there is really good evidence, I think, to suggest, particularly in the United States, that the particular manifestation of DE&I initiatives on certain campuses and stuff led to an absolute effect where people were like, well, now I just can't say stuff because I'm going to get canceled, or I'm going to lose my job, or I'm going to, it be holdover the calls, or I'm going to have students protesting my offices. And I would say an environment like that, although very, very well intentioned, because I think a lot of those initiatives come from a very strong sense of, but there is structural imbalance and there is discrimination. We need to redress that. But the particular execution, I think, and this was more pronounced, I think, in the US than anywhere else, was one where it did have a chilling effect. And I think in a lot of organizations, you do see the I wouldn't go so far as to say what some people say, like, oh, you can't say anything these days, because it's like, well, you self-evidently can. But the trajectory there of I think people are right to be cautious about whether the things they will say land them in hot water. And I think there's no sense there'll be collateral damage to that, right? Of it, from a truth perspective.
I like truthiness better. That's a cool word.
Yeah. It's a Stephen Colbertism.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Please continue. Sorry.
No. I love truthiness. I think about the slippery scale of truthiness: truth, positioning, spin, lies. I'm like, this stuff is not black and white; it's an analog scale.
Yes.
And we could certainly dig into that. So in terms of managing the risk, two things to note. Number one, there's a reason why in a court of law, truth is an absolute defense to defamation. You cannot be convicted of defamation if what you're saying is true. And I think in most organizational contexts, we need to try to create a culture where truth is an absolute defense to the things that you're saying. Maybe not absolute defense, because I think there's probably other things going on in organizations as well. But like, where as a general rule, saying true things is protected as saying true stuff. And there certainly is at least one legal protection for that, which is whistleblower protections that exist in a very robust sense in Australia. But I know that the real heart of this question is not the legal risk. It's the kind of, I suppose, well, some of it's legal, but some of it is, there's great cultural and interpersonal risk. And I think that's what governs most interpersonal relationships at work, right? It's this sense of, well, I'm not going to get sued if I say this, but I might not get promoted.
And I might become a pariah.
And I might become a pariah. Yeah.
And but truth matters. And I've got to navigate these waters.
Got to thread that needle. And so where do you start? You start with leaders, right? You start with leaders going first. So and I would get even more specific. My advice is leaders go first with me truth, right? So find, like, I was once in a company, one of the early companies that I ran, where my co-founder, Pete Sheehan, did around a 360-degree feedback. It was catastrophically bad. It was like the worst feedback you could possibly imagine. He's fine with me sharing this story. There's a whole chapter about it in the book. If you want something fun in the book, there's literally, he let me share the pictures of his feedback graphs from Leadership Impact. They are catastrophically bad. His response, most people would bury it in a drawer. They would say that the instruments aren't right. Pete's response was to call an all-of-company meeting, put his feedback on slides, and share all of it, unedited and unabridged, with the whole company. Me truth, right? So that is a leader sitting in front of 75 people and saying, here are my flaws and vulnerabilities. These are me truths, right? This is my impact. This is the impact I'm having. Good luck having a culture where people feel like they're going to get in trouble for sharing the truth after seeing that happen, right? This is the most powerful symbol in a company. I think leaders going first can create environments where others feel permission to do it.
So one of the last questions here is about artificial intelligence and how that impacts the truth. So if truth depends on the environment and the conditions that we create, as we've mentioned, how does artificial intelligence change that dynamic?
Artificial intelligence is the nuclear weapon of truth, right? It is taking a torch to our capacity to have reason-based, fact-based, accurate conversations. Data I saw last week from the University of Sydney, more than 50% of social media content on LinkedIn is now AI generated. So more than half is AI generated. More than half of that contains, more than 50% of AI generated content has significant empirical errors in it. Otherwise, that's how they claim it. I'll just say is bullshit, right? Like so that basically means now at least 25% of our social media content is just like AI generated incorrect slop. NHS data would suggest that on certain topics, anywhere between 70 and 80% of digital content is misinformation. 70 to 80% on some topics is misinformation. And data from last year would suggest that even when you try to train people to tell the difference between AI and not AI generated content, less than 50% of people can do it. So I'll give you a really crystal clear, practical example. Misinformation about ADHD, right? Misinformation about ADHD has been shared more than 3 billion times just on TikTok. Right? This is one topic, one social media platform, 3 billion times it's been shared. AI has enormous potential. I think it offers, like, I built a technology company that was basically an AI-enabled tech company. I'm not a Luddite. Like, I built and sold a tech company. Like, I get it. I totally get it. I use AI in my work. AI is is a hugely powerful tool. At the same time, it is a train wreck for our societal relationship to truth. And unfortunately, we're progressing in a way where I think the type of conversations we need to be having about that just aren't being. We're leaping straight to everyone should adopt it for everything, and every company needs to be AI native, and everyone's got to use it everywhere. We're leaping straight to. That would be like going, we've just invented nuclear weapons. It's the most powerful thing that's ever been invented. The first thing we should do before we've built any guardrails, before we've got any policies, is everyone should subscribe to it and have it in their house, right? Which is a Tristan Harris analogy. So AI is hugely problematic for this, but it's also incredibly powerful. So I think one of the most important things to get right in the next 12 years at 12 months at a governance level is figuring out how we put the right guardrails around AI usage to try to control this problem of misinformation and disinformation and AI slop. Because I genuinely think if we fail to do that, we face existential problems as businesses and societies that are truly consequential, I think.
One of the points of optimism I've got around that is seeing on Twitter or X where someone posts something that is quite clearly demonstrably not true, and the algorithm will put a comment under it saying, this has effectively been proven to be not true in this paper or whatever, and the majority of comments are saying the same thing. Point A, and point B, when people in comments or reactions will say at Grok, is this actually true? Give me the data, and the AI Grok will then reply and say, well, and it will basically suggest has been proven true or not. So
yeah, correct the record.
Correct the record. So I've found I agree with your point, but that's a point of optimism that I have in the midst of that.
Yeah, and look, if you can technology a way into a problem, hopefully you can technology a way out of it. Like it would be we're going to need something like that. It was very disheartening to see in the wake of the last US presidential election, a lot of the platforms, social media platforms, Meta did this, Google did this, started walking back their fact-checking technologies. I think they were basically like, well, if Trump's been elected, like, we're in the end of fact anyway, so what's the point? And it was kind of disappointing to see them walk back a lot of those investments. I don't know if they're back on the rise. And then of course the other issue with them is if you spend a bit of time, like, so one of my favorite pastimes, because I'm a massive nerd, when I was writing my book, was to try to see how good AI was at fact checking the book. And when it was good, it was very, very good. But when it was wrong, it just dug in around its wrongness. And so, of course, if AI hallucination is part of the problem, solving hallucination in fact-checking is another part of the problem. But I share your optimism around the fact that, like, platforms are aware of this, right? And they're kind of doing this work. I think the problem that we have to figure out to navigate is just a sequencing thing, right? Like, the technology is getting ahead of its skis. Or the adoption of the technology, I think, is getting a little bit ahead of its skis. And like I said earlier in the conversation, we face an issue where if any senior leader of a publicly listed company was to turn around tomorrow and put an announcement out to the market that said, look, we're just slowing down on the AI thing, they would be crucified in the market. There is this pressure to be seen to be doing AI investment in a way that is fueling the fire a little bit. And frankly, a lot of that pressure is coming from vendors themselves trying to prop up and justify the insane investments in infrastructure that are being made.
Yeah, insane is probably not strong enough word there. Tell me about a book that's impacted you, or what is a book that you would recommend for our audience?
Can I give two quick ones?
Yes, you can.
Is that all right? Am I allowed?
Yeah.
So because my work one, I was thinking about this. You were kind enough to flag that this question came. And so I was really thinking about it. So the first one is from just a management and a leadership perspective. I'm going to go back in time for that one. I think Patrick Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, because I think it's like mainlining good management advice as far as I'm concerned. It's like if you, and right at the foundation of his model is trust, right? And trust and truth go love and marriage. Trust and truth just go like hand in hand for that conversation. So I think 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. But the book that's actually had the biggest impact on my life, I think, in the last 5 years is a book called, I think is it on my shelf behind me somewhere? It's called Determined, The Science of Life Without Free Will, by a guy called Professor Robert Sapolsky, who is a biochemist and primatologist. And it talks about why the illusion that we have of kind of this sense of libertarian free will is an illusion, and what are the implications of that for policy, for decisions, for life. And it's beautiful and glorious. And it's like 800 pages, and I finished it and started it again immediately.
Wow.
It's incredible. So that's Determined, The Science of Life Without Free Will by Robert Sapolsky.
Which speaks to our earlier conversation about agency. How can people learn more about you and the work that you do?
Yeah, so just go to domthurbon.com, DOMTHURBON.com. You'll find my stuff. The book is called To Be Honest, How Making Truth Happen Builds Better Businesses, Lives, and Societies. You can get that in good bookstores and online, of course. But yeah, I think those are the main 2 bits. LinkedIn, I'm more from Dom on Instagram because people kept asking after presentations, where do we hear more from Dom? So I thought that sounds like a good handle. More from Dom.
What haven't we covered off that you wanted to cover off today, Dom?
Look, I think we covered the terrain that I was really excited to cover. I think if there could be one takeaway, it is just that idea of truth is not a value, it's a behavior, and we're either doing it or we're not, and that we have tremendous agency. We're not merely consumers of culture, we're creators of culture, and that the best way to make truth happen is to go first. I think that was what I was hoping to be able to rant and rave about over the conversation.
Well, I don't think it was a rant or rave. I think it was a great conversation. Dom, thank you so very much for sharing your wisdom today with me and our audience. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation.
Brad, mate, thank you very much indeed for having me on the show.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you'd be kind enough to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be really helpful to other like-minded entrepreneurs, and then we can grow our community. If you want to find out more about our guests, head over to evolutionpartners.com.au/podcast, where you can find show notes and other additional reading. Hope to see you back next week. Until then, keep thriving.